If you're anything like us, then you'll have been watching The Last of Us television show on HBO, which is, so far, a pretty damn good video game adaptation. But adaptation is really the key word there, as there are a number of deviations that the show is taking to keep things fresh and surprising for fans of the game. One of the biggest changes, however, is that of the Infected. Now, we got our first proper look at this new take of The Last of Us Infected in episode 2 of the show, so if you aren't up to that point, we will be covering some spoilers from that episode. If you are all caught up to episode 2 and are scratching your head over the whole thing, or maybe just wondering what changes were made between the Infected in the shows and the original game series, then look no further than this very video. Hello guys, it's Aaron from Push Square, and I am recommending that you strap in as we break down the biggest differences between the Infected in both The Last of Us TV show and the video game. In both the show and the games, the infection that ravages the human population is the cordyceps fungus, something based very much on real life, but thankfully it only affects ants in our world. This fungal infection spreads across the brain, taking over its host and eventually sprouting from its body. In the game, the fungus spreads across the world via tainted crops from South America that make their way into the general food supply. And it's a very similar process in the television show. In that version, the outbreak stems from Jakarta in Indonesia, this time coming from flour. From what we know so far, the stages of infection and infection itself across both versions of The Last of Us, for the most part, are very similar, with infection stemming from either a bite or, like in the games, the inhalation of spores, but more on those later. The cordyceps brain infection has various stages, 4 in both the game and the show, going by the first 2 episodes and any pre-release trailers. In both versions we have runners, stalkers, clickers and bloaters. The runner, stalker and clicker stages take place within the first year or so of infection, with the former causing infected hosts to grow violent and attack anyone on sight. The stalkers being the more nimble and cautious version of the runners, and then the clickers, which sees the fungal growth sprout from the brain and cause blindness. However, clickers have extremely sensitive hearing and, going by their namesake, use a form of echolocation. They are far more violent than your simple runner, as they will ravage their prey. Lastly, we have the bloater, which is a result of decades worth of fungal growth, armouring the individual with thick layers of sprouting plates. These guys are brutal. Missing from the show so far, we have shamblers, which are an explosive alternative to bloaters, which were introduced in The Last of Us Part 2. And then confined infected that have been left for long periods of time have also been known to conjoin. Okay, so earlier I mentioned spores, which if you are watching this video having only seen the show, you may be a little confused by. In the video game, in addition to being bitten, individuals could become infected by breathing in spores, which emanated from infected once they had died and effectively planted themselves. In the game, this is typically found to be the case in dark, confined and damp locations like basements, where the fungus would spread from the corpse and eventually start producing spores. In the television show, this is completely gone and is replaced with something far more interesting: tendrils. Now, there were a couple of reasons for this switch. For one, co-creator Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin felt that spores would be airborne everywhere rather than just in small, localized areas like they are in the game, so they decided to move away from that version. Secondly, the tendrils actually give the infected a far more intimidating presence because they can effectively communicate. Our first exposure to the tendrils showcased an infected spreading tendrils into the neck of an injured woman. In the game, the infected will simply bite and viciously tear apart their victims before they turn. Spoilers for episode 2, but Tess's death showcased a big deviation in the behaviour of the infected from the games, as an infected individual slowly approaches the still Tess before gently extending the tendrils from its mouth into hers. It was very creepy. However, the bigger change is that a tendril network seems to spread underground, effectively connecting the infected. If you step on a tendril root or kill an infected that is connected, a horde miles away could be alerted. It is actually a far scarier version than what we got in the game, and easily the TV show's biggest departure from the source material so far. And those are the major differences between the infected in The Last of Us television show and The Last of Us video games. If you are watching the show week to week, know that you can check out reviews for each episode here on the channel, so be sure to subscribe to Push Square for that and plenty of other PlayStation coverage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.